So day 3 of the Derek Chauvin trial for the murder of George Floyd. And it's becoming abundantly clear that Mr. Floyd was not the only person the police victimized that day. Let's talk about that. Because justice matters. Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. You know, so much of what we're seeing in the Derek Chauvin trial for the murder of George Floyd is so intensely disturbing, but I want to take on two related issues in this short video today. One, I want to talk about the impact that the officers' conduct that day had on the witnesses who we see testifying in the trial, and then I want to talk about what others around our nation, around our country who are watching the trial and specifically watching that videotape over and over again, what impact it might have on them. But let me start with the witnesses. And let me read a headline from today's New York Times, which is doing a pretty good job of covering the trial in real time and publishing updates throughout the day. Here's one of the headlines from today. Witnesses describe frustration and fear as they watched George Floyd struggle. And as we watch, the witnesses struggle to tell the jury what they saw that day through their tears, through their emotion, through their grief, through their horror. Not only do they talk about their frustration and fear, but they also talk about their guilt. Guilt inspired by what those police officers did to George Floyd. Remember Darnella Frazier? She is a young lady now, 18 years old, who took a video of the scene on her phone. She testified about what she saw, but she also told us that she stays up nights apologizing over and over again to George Floyd for not being able to do more to help him, to save him. She feels guilt, remorse. She said her life has been turned upside down. Courtesy of what Derek Chauvin and the other police officers did that day. Did you see the testimony today of Christopher Martin? Brave, strong, 19-year-old young man who worked at the convenience store where George Floyd tried to pass a fake $20 bill. And you heard Chris Martin say, you know, I took it, I looked at it, I kind of thought it was fake. And if I accept a fake $20 bill, it comes out of my pay. So he went back and forth, but finally he decided to kind of call it out. And did you hear what he said? He said, you know, I felt guilty. Like maybe if I just didn't take the bill and didn't get the police involved, George Floyd wouldn't have been killed. And did you see him on the scene in the video with his hands on his head, walking around as the police were killing George Floyd? And young Chris Martin said he felt guilty. He felt responsible. That's what the police did not only to George Floyd that day, but they did it to Darnella Frazier and they did it to Christopher Martin, made those two teenagers feel guilty, like they were responsible for the police excessive force that killed George Floyd. That is what these former police officers, Chauvin, Tao, Kang, Lane, did not only to George Floyd, but to the witnesses who saw what they did, killed a man intentionally, ended his life. How many more victims are out there? Here's the larger concern. For all of the people around the country watching this trial, watching that videotape, what they saw was that when the police were called, 4 armed police officers showed up and intentionally killed a man, ended his life in front of a whole bunch of bystanders. What impact might that have on people in the future after seeing that tape, after watching this trial, when they have to decide whether to call the police? It's going to have an impact. A whole generation of young people are watching that video, and they are seeing that when the police are called, 4 of them respond and look at what they did. How many store owners, if they have a crime or an incident in their store, might now think twice before calling the police? How many domestic violence victims, after seeing what these 4 officers did to George Floyd and by extension did to everybody who saw them kill George Floyd that day and everybody who has now seen the videotape, what do you think a domestic violence victim might think before deciding whether to call the police to come help him or her? You know, the damage that these 4 police officers did, first and foremost to George Floyd and his family and the Minneapolis community and our country, is incalculable. And then the long-term damage they did to anybody and everybody in this nation who saw that video and who's watching this trial. And the only way we can address this, folks, is with reform, real reform, true reform, not just banning this chokehold or banning that police tactic. Do you really think banning a chokehold or prohibiting a particular police tactic would have stopped Derek Chauvin or Tao or Kang or Lang from policing the way they policed that day? 1,000 prohibitions wouldn't change the way those, I hesitate to call them men, individuals, police. There has to be real reform. And I've talked in previous videos about, in my humble opinion, how we can go about really reforming police. And I'll talk about it again in future videos, and I don't have all the answers. I have some ideas after 30 years inside the criminal justice system, working as a prosecutor, first in the Army as a JAG, and then for nearly quarter of a century, it's a long time, at the Department of Justice at the U.S. Attorney's Office in the District of Columbia, including as Chief of Homicide. Real reform, and it's possible. Frankly, it has perhaps never been more possible than at this moment. And I don't know that it's ever been more necessary than at this moment. Folks, as always, please stay safe. Please stay tuned. And we will stay tuned in to the George Floyd murder trial. And we will be watching to make sure justice is done, because justice matters. It matters.